Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Um, I am indeed in Texas. I crossed over the ocean, but I still love Australia. So I want to keep doing these talks and being in touch with you guys and learning more about bees and pollinators and the environment and nature, as most of you know that I love. So today I decided to talk about queens. My PhD was on stingless bees, specifically on Tetragonilla carbonaria, which I will refer as TC. And my PhD, one of the things I tried doing was understanding more about the queens and their behavior. Why do I call it the queen drama? We'll talk about it throughout the presentation. And I hope that you guys will have questions and comments at the end. Queens are a very important part for the social bees. Why? Because queens are the mothers to most of the bees inside of a hive. They lay all the eggs, and without the queens, then the colonies just decrease in population and die. That makes the queens one of the most important castes inside of the hive. And they are very mysterious. Why? Because they remain inside of the hive for most of their lives. Queens will fly out only once in a lifetime, or maybe twice or three times. But apart from that, it's going to stay inside of the hive most of their lives. That makes them quite elusive and also very secretive. And one of my PhD aims was understanding more about the behavior that they have inside of the hive, how they communicate with the workers and the males, how are they selected, and how are they made, which is very important. So that's why I call it the queen drama, the mysterious lives of stingless bee queens. So let's start. I put this slide to begin with. This is my introduction. And I keep talking about this diversity of bees. There's around 20,000 bee species out there. 20,000, that's a lot. I would dare you to name more than 20 species. I don't think anyone can do that here, not even me. That is quite concerning because that means we don't know them, even though they are out there constantly flying amongst us. These are not creatures that live deep in the ocean, but these are insects that are visiting our gardens, our plants, the bush that we walked around. So 20,000 bee species, that's a lot. And these are some species, right? I want to show this image for you to know that they can come in different shapes, colors, and sizes. They are all doing different things, but they do have certain things in common, such as their diet, right? Most of the bees are going to be vegetarian, which means they will get stuff from the plants, and they will get pollen and nectar. By doing so, they will move pollen around from flower to flower, and they will do something called pollination, which gives us fruits. It gives fruits and seeds to the plants. That's how plants can reproduce. But it also, as humans, we can benefit from this important relationship because we get fruits from the trees. So I'm sidetracking a little bit because I love to talk about this diversity. However, we're going to focus on a very small group of these bees. And with this image, I want to say that out of these 20,000 around species of bees, only around 620 are social. So it's a tiny, tiny percent. Out of all these bees, a very, very small percent are going to be social. So this is more about diversity. So in this case, we're looking at size diversity of bees. So on the top left corner, we have the smallest bee in the world, which is a bee called Quasihesma. Then in the middle, we have a bee called Apis mellifera, which is the honeybee. And I put that one because we all know how that one looks. We all know the size of that one. So then we can get an idea of how the smallest bee looks like and the biggest one in the world. On the bottom part, we have the biggest bee in the world, which is gigantic. It measures around 40 millimeters. And this bee, not many people know it. It's called Megachile pluto. That's the scientific name. We thought it was extinct, and we recently discovered it in Indonesia back again. So it's important to talk about this bee because then we can talk more about that with our friends, our family members, and then conservation of bees can improve. People can get more funding, we can do more science, and we can also protect them. So I always like to talk about bee diversity in my talks. Again, out of these three bees, only the one in the middle is social, which means either both the top one and the bottom one are solitary bees. What's a solitary bee? They live lives just like flies do. One female will live by its own, will meet a boy, will reproduce, and that female will take care of her own offspring. What happens with social bees? Social bees have evolved to have this cooperation system in which they have different castes inside of the colony. So we will have the queen, we'll have the workers, we'll have the guards, and we'll have the males. And they are all part of the same species, and they are all cooperating for the well-being of the colony. So that makes these two groups of bees very important to understand: solitary bees and social bees. Most of the bees in the world are solitary. We're only going to focus today, talk on the social bees because they have a queen, and we're going to be talking about these queens. That is a close-up for that smallest bee in the world. So take a look at that one. It's very, very interesting. It doesn't look like the honeybee. It has adapted its body shape towards maybe the flowers that it's visiting. But I like to put these two bees because they are very different to the honeybees, and they are still bees, and they are still pretty cool. And Australia gets the pride to having the smallest bee in the world, and Indonesia gets the pride to having the biggest bee in the world. Great. Now focusing only in Australian bees. Australia has around 1,700 bee species, and only around 15 are social. So out of all these images that you're looking at, only 2 are social. Would you guess which ones? I'm going to leave to you maybe like 2 seconds to try to guess, but I'll give you the answer. These are the names of the bees. So these are all some of my favorite bees in Australia. And again, I want to make emphasis in which ones are solitary and which ones are social. So in the next slide, all the solitary bees will disappear, and we will only keep the social bees that we find in Australia. Ta-da! This is it. These are the only 2 groups of social bees we find in Australia. Western honeybee. What do we know about that one? That is not native. That has been introduced in Australia a long time ago. And then the stingless bee, which we have around 12 to 14 species in Australia. And one of them is the Trigonella carbonaria, TC, which is the one that we find naturally in Sydney. And that's the one that I work with during my PhD. These 2 are social. So again, these 2 have a caste system, which means they have the workers, the queens, the males, etc. And they also have different tasks inside of the colony. So workers will be taking care of the queens sometimes, but they will also be taking care of the eggs or foraging out for food. We're not going to be focusing on the workers today. We will be focusing on the queens. So let's talk about it. Stingless bees are found all around the tropics. So this map is showing you where we find them. Australia is in blue because it has not many species. It only has around 12 to 14, like we said before. And it only has 2 genera. In the map, it's important to know that Brazil has most of the species, and that's why it's more red and orange, because Brazil holds around 400 species of stingless bees. We're now focusing on the stingless bees. So I'm going to also leave aside honeybees, and we'll be talking only about the stingless bee queens. So again, what makes them highly social? Like a cooperative brood care, which means workers are not able to reproduce anymore, but they can take care of the eggs and the queen. We have that presence of castes, which is inflexible, which means if a bee is born a queen, it's going to stay a queen. If a bee is born a worker, it's going to stay a worker. And if a bee is born a male, it's going to stay a male. Why does it say inflexible? Because some other bees can be flexible. For example, bumblebees. In bumblebees, queens can begin their lives as workers, which means the queens will be foraging for food and taking care of the eggs. And then later on, once the first clutch of eggs develops and become adult workers, then they will start doing the work of the workers, and the queen can finally stay in the job of the queen. So it means that the queen will no longer forage actively for food or take care of the eggs. The workers will be doing that. The only task of the queen is going to be laying eggs. So in the case of stingless bees, the queens are not good at doing foraging tasks. They only do what the queens do, which is laying the eggs. They don't have a solitary phase in life. So again, comparing to bumblebees, In the queens of bumblebees, they are more hardcore because queens can be by themselves at the beginning, be alone, and start laying eggs by themselves. In the case of stingless bees and honeybees, queens are never alone. They're always surrounded by workers helping them. Queens are quite useless if you separate them from the colony. They need to be fed by the workers and be taken care of by the workers. And perennial colonies, which means colonies can live for more than a year. Again, compared to bumblebees are found in places that have really cold winters, such as Canada and Russia, which means their colonies will die every year. Before they die, they will send out the queens, so the queens can go out, get a lot of food, and then go underground so they can hibernate. And then in the next springtime, the queens can come out and start a new colony. Honeybees and stingless bees are perennial, which means they never die. These colonies can go over and over again. So we can have colonies that can live around 50 years, 100 years. They eventually die if the queen dies and they are not successful at requeening, but it's a very different life from that of bumblebees. Okay. Now, requeening process. So now if we understood what a queen is doing, we need to understand that if we see a hive of a social bee, in this case a stingless bee, most of the time it's going to be in a state that we call it the queen right state. So most colonies out there have a queen, and we call that state the queen right state or queen right colony. What's very interesting is what happens when the queen dies. So if the queen dies, then the colony goes into a process called the requeening process, in which they need to build up a queen again, but they also need to select the queen they like the most. That's very interesting, and that happens sometimes in the colonies. Why would the queen die? Maybe she got an infection, maybe a virus took her down, or maybe she just died from age. It doesn't matter, because if she dies, then the whole colony goes into this very interesting process of requeening. So in order to requeen, they need to make queens, and we'll talk about this in the next slides. How are they made, which is very interesting. Let's forget about that now and talk about that bee that we see on the right side. That is going to be called the princess bee or the virgin queen. So virgin queens need to come in handy at this time. If the queen dies, virgin queens will appear in the colony. They will be selected through a very interesting process inside of the hive. And again, I will not go into detail because I will explain that later. But once the princess is selected, then the males will gather around the hive. She will mate with only one male, and then she will go back inside of the colony and she will become very big as the queen we see on the left side. Great. This is a picture showing you how the males are gathering outside of the colony. We call them the male roosters or also male swarms. And what they are doing is they are coming from around the area, gathering in a big cloud of the males, waiting for this queen to come up. They fly during the day, and in the evening or the night, they will roost. So they will form these bachelor groups all together, roosting in some branches around the area. Interestingly, in honeybees, males are always allowed to come back into the hive so they get a cozy night environment. In the stingless bee world, it's a little bit more hardcore. Males need to stay outside, and they are never allowed back into the hive. So it's good luck. You're a big boy, you stay out. So they will congregate and they will join in these big clusters of only males. So for the people that already own stingless bee colonies, sometimes we see this throughout the year, especially in springtime, and it's very interesting to observe. That is during the night, what they do, they rooster, but this is during the day. So I want to show you this video. These are males flying. So this is what they do. This is called the male swarm. All these thousands of males are flying in front of the colony, and that colony that it's in front of them, it's a colony that doesn't have a queen and need to requeen. So they are being called from the environment, which is very, very interesting. The video was taken in slow motion, so you can tell how fast these male swarms can be. And one of the questions that I get sometimes is, how are these males arriving? Who is calling them? How can they sense the colony? So The answer to this question is not easy. It's still being studied in Brazil and some other countries. And we think it's a role playing from different parts. It's just a intertwine of roles from different bees inside of the hive. So we think workers are putting a signal out there in the environment saying, we are queenless, we need males to mate with our princes. So they are leaving little cues in the environment by leaving little scent trails. And then once males find these scent trails, they start arriving close to the hive, and then they can smell the princess, which is going to be smelly, but not from a very long distance. And then males, once they start congregating, they will also attract themselves. So males can also smell other males. So we think it's a whole role playing between princesses, males, and workers. Good. Next thing I want to address is how are the queens born? So this is very, very interesting too, because in the stingless bee world and honeybee world, every single female can become a queen at some point. So workers are females, queens are females. What is telling them apart? So in the case of honeybees, there is something called royal jelly. So if you feed a baby girl bee with royal jelly, then you can make a queen. If you don't give her royal jelly, then she will become a worker. Once she becomes a worker, she never can go back into being a queen. So this is for the stingless bees. They do not have royal jelly. And what is going to determine if she becomes a queen or not is the amount of food that she gets when she's a baby. So we call them the queen cells. And these images A and B is showing you how big this cell is compared to the rest of the other cells. So I do some work at primary schools and kids have called it the big potatoes. So that's how I call them now. So in image B specifically, you can see how big this cell is compared to the rest of the cells that are next to it. So on the left side, we have all the worker cells, and on the right side, we have the queen cell, which is almost double, triple the size of a worker cell. Once the princess hatches, then she's going to be looking like the one on letter C. And once that princess actually mates and meets the boy, then she's going to become really big, like the one we see on letter D. Queens in the stingless bee world. So this image is showing you how they can vary. So every single letter is showing you a different species. They are all from Brazil. But like we said at the beginning of the talk, we also find stingless bees in Brazil, which are closely related to the ones in Australia. And just take a look at how they look. They're pretty big. Once they mate, they will never be able to fly back again, contrary to honeybees. In honeybees, queens can always fly back again by not eating for a few days. So they decrease their weight and then they can keep flying. In the stingless bee world, that doesn't happen. So once the queen has mated, she will never, ever fly back again. The queens enlarge a lot and they are quite stretched, and that's why they look so creamy, because they are full of eggs inside. So just an example, a TC queen can lay around 300 eggs every day, which is a lot of eggs in a lifetime. This is a picture I took while traveling in Brazil. So this is very cool. This is one of the only one species in the world that can have more than one queen. So in this case, we have 3 queens. So we can tell them apart from the workers because they are quite big again. They are quite enlarged. I'll go back and you'll see. So workers are on the left side, queens are on the right side. So you can see how big and chunky they look compared to the rest of the ones. The species can have up to 7 queens. In this case, we saw these 3 queens, which was very exciting. They all seem to get along nicely, and they all seem to just don't compete with the other queens, and they're all laying eggs and helping the colony survive, which is really cool. Another thing I want to touch on is the fact that we can get some miniature queens. So what are miniature queens? This is a very interesting concept. In the top image, we see the miniature queen, and the bottom one, it's a normal queen. So most bees will do what they are told. So if they're a worker bee and the egg is laid in a worker cell, then the little larvae will eat that food and will become a worker. We do, however, have some selfish larvae which will sneak in the neighbor's cell and start stealing the food. So in the case of a miniature queen, that queen was not supposed to be a queen. She was supposed to be a worker, but she didn't want to be a worker, which is very interesting. So this larva ate all her food, and then when she was done, she didn't want to stay like that, so she just jumped into the other cell and started stealing the neighbor's food. So what happens? She doesn't get enough food to become a full queen, but she also doesn't get enough food to become a worker, so she gets to be something in between. So these little selfish queens have also been studied. We don't know if this happens in the Australian stingless bees, but it certainly happens in Brazil. And they can rule colonies. They can be normal queens. They can also be selected by the workers. So it's something very interesting to do follow-up studies. But as I said before, we don't know if this happens in Australia. This is the anatomy of the queens. So in this image, it's from a study that I published a few years ago. In this image, we see the different ovaries of females in the bee colony. So remember that workers are also females, so they also have ovaries, but they're very, very small compared to the queen ovaries. So that worker ovary, it's on the bottom left side. Then we have the virgin queen ovary, which is quite big compared to the worker. And then we have the mated queen ovary, which is huge. Why is it so big? Because this bee has mated already, and all the eggs have starting to develop inside. And that's why we get these big, big balls in white. What I also want to touch on this image is that little bubble structure that we see in the virgin queen and the mated queen. At the bottom of the virgin queen ovary, we see this bubble thing that looks empty. And in the mated queen, it's full of white stuff. This thing is called the spermatheca. And this is a very special organ that the queen uses to store the sperm of the male for her lifetime. So she can fertilize the eggs whenever she wants. So this organ allows the sperm to stay alive for the rest of the lifetime of the queen, which is really impressive, which can be around 2 years. So in the virgin queen, it's empty because she doesn't have the sperm yet. And in the mated queen, she has mated. Obviously, she's going to have the sperm inside. And that's going to be used to fertilize all her 300 eggs that she can lay every day. So it's a very, very full-on world. In this one, we can see, again, those little structures with the little asterisk. That is the spermatheca. So in letters A and C, it's empty. And in the letters B and D, it's already full of sperm. So that's when the ovaries start becoming active. Letters C and D are virgin queen ovaries, and that's why they are like quite... they have this spiral shape. And letter B, it's queen ovaries, and that's why they look way bigger. And then letter A, it's a worker ovary, so that's why it looks so small. Good. So now that we understood anatomy and a little bit of the behavior, I want to go and touch on the part of queen behavior. So how are these queens actually selected? If the queen dies and they only have one princess, that is an easy path. That one single princess is going to become the new queen. But what happens if they have more than one princess? Then they go into a selection process, which is like a democracy. You could say like little political parties around. So each queen is giving certain information that it's different from the other queens. And the workers are the ultimate selectors inside of the hive. So workers will actually end up selecting which queen they like the most. So in this video, we can see how this virgin queen, which is in the middle, it's trying to communicate information to the workers. And in a few seconds from now, we're going to see aggression, which is how the workers actually jump on top of the virgin queen and start attacking her. So in this case, we can see how the worker is not very happy with her. They are actually trying to attack the queen. And the way they take them down, it's a little bit dramatic. They will chop off the antennae and the wings and some parts of the body, and then they will just put some resin around them, so they completely immobilize them, and then the next day they will just take them out with the rubbish in the next morning. So it's a very dramatic world out there. In this video, in this image, we see that virgin queen in the middle also. And what was very interesting about this image is that a few seconds later, I saw other two princess bees just walking around. So in this case, we had 3 princesses that were all like communicating information, and ultimately only one got to be the lucky one, which was the only one that got selected. Finally, to wrap up, I just want to talk a little bit about the queen behavior, about how they start their lives and what development pathways they have. So in this case, this is the line of queen life, we can call it. The first step, it's eclosion. So it's when the queen comes out, she's going to be bigger than the workers and she looks creamy in color. Then she's going to go into step number 2, which is the hiding phase. So in hiding phase, queens will be very shy. They will not be out. They will be hiding from the workers because, as we said before, they are normally killed. If they are born in a queen right state, they will not be useful for the colony, so then they will be killed. So they need to be hiding for most of their lives. However, if the queen does die, then the princesses go into this very interesting state. We have it here. So that queen moving around, we can see her quite frenetically. It's just active. It's very active. It's very full on with her activity, and she's just flapping wings around, trying to communicate information with the rest of the workers, which is a very big change with step number 2, in the other way that it was hiding most of the time, and suddenly out of the blue, she just becomes extremely active and trying to interact with most of the workers. Then in step number 4, the queen is going to leave the colony. So this is the only time she's going to fly away from the colony. So it's only maybe 1 or 3 times she does location flights at the beginning, and maybe 1 or 2 location flights. And then the third one will be the mating flight, and the one that she will fly out. And we already know that there will be a male swarm outside of this hive. She will mate with only 1 boy, which I didn't say until now. So in this case, the queen's only mate with 1 single male, and then she comes back into the hive, right? So this is the mating. This is a video showing how the male is mating with the queen. And we can see how the male is just leaving a little part of his body in the queen, which is known as the mating plug. And then the queen is going to be fertilized by the male. The next steps are very interesting. So once the queen comes back into the hive, she's going to be surrounded by the workers, and she's going to be inspected. So in this case, it's quite a crucial step in the way that workers will decide whether they like her or not. Once she is accepted, then we're going to go into this image where we see the queen painted in green being surrounded by all these workers, which is a very interesting part of the process. And once she has been accepted by the workers, then she's going to start laying eggs. So in this last video, we can see how they have already started to lay eggs. We can see all these little cells, and we can see that little queen painted in silver just walking around the eggs and laying eggs quite happily. Other behaviors that I observed were positive and negative. So in the first one, I saw feeding from the workers. So if the workers are feeding the queens, that means they obviously like her, and that is a good sign. However, some negative behavior that we can have from workers is aggression, in which workers will jump onto the queen and start biting her off. Execution, as we said before, it's when the workers will actually pull limbs away and will put resin on top of the queen, so they will mummify her. And the last one is rubbish loitering. So we can see how some queens just go into the rubbish area and they just wait there patiently to be attacked by other workers. That is 2 queens that I painted in blue, and they were the 2 queens that I found loitering around that rubbish area. I had a 3rd queen painted in green, which was being fed by the workers. So it's quite clear that workers have a preference right away for one of the queens. And then the rest of the queens will be just waiting patiently for being attacked by the workers. Great. That is all for now. It's really good because it took half an hour. I do want to say again how important bees are. I couldn't touch much on conservation, but insects are facing a lot of problems at the moment. I think it's our duty as humans to protect them and to start talking more about them and do more education sessions so we can understand more about their diversity and how important they are. And thank you all for coming today to the talk. I hope you enjoy the talk, and I'm happy to stay as long as needed for questions and comments. So thank you very much.